A woman, clipboard clutched, strode purposefully towards him, her voice loud, confident, and utterly convinced of her authority. She was in charge. What she didn't grasp was that the man she was berating owned the entire lake. Her fishing club's days were swiftly diminishing. It was just after 7 a.m. when Clarence Rucker reversed his truck onto the gravel expanse at Mayfield Lake, nestled outside Springfield, Missouri. The sun had barely kissed the tree line. The water lay still, unblemished. Clarence, 47, had anticipated this morning for weeks. He'd spent most of the previous night meticulously preparing his old, gleaming aluminum fishing boat for this very moment. Quiet, serene, just him, a thermos of hot coffee, and the lake his father had introduced him to as a child. He was beginning to unhitch the trailer when he heard the crisp crunch of approaching footsteps. Turning, he saw her. Mid-50s, short blonde hair, sunglasses already perched despite the early light. She held a clipboard like a badge of office, sporting a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You can't park that here," she declared, her tone sharp. Clarence blinked. "I'm sorry." He advanced. "This lot is private for community use only. You need to move that boat." Clarence placed his wrench on the trailer hitch and straightened. "Morning. Do you live here?" "I'm on the HOA board," she stated, infusing the words with undue importance. "And you're not on the list of permitted lake users. The lake's restricted to the Mayfield Hills Fishing Club. You're trespassing." He gazed past her, surveying the lake's edge. No one else was there. Just him. "Didn't see a sign." "There's one posted near the pavilion," she said flatly. "You must have overlooked it." Clarence offered a slight nod. "I've fished here plenty of times. Never had an issue." "Well, you have one now," she snapped, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "Either you move your boat or I'm reporting this." Clarence drew a breath, striving for an even tone. "What's your name?" "Teresa Holcomb," she announced, standing taller as if the name should resonate. "And yours?" "Clarence Rucker." She scribbled something. "Is that boat registered to you?" "It is." "Well, Clarence," she said, her voice laced with condescension, "I'm sure you're just unaware of the rules, but you can't just show up and dump your boat wherever you like. We've had issues before. People leaving trash, breaking things. This area is for residents and their guests, under supervision." He observed her. There was something in the way she pronounced people that grated on him. He didn't voice it, but he felt it. The way she scrutinized him as if she'd already formed a judgment about him and his intentions. "I'm not breaking anything," he said. "Just trying to enjoy the water. You need to pack up and leave now." There was a lengthy silence. Clarence looked down at the gravel, then back at the lake. He turned to her again. "Are you sure you want to pursue this?" She blinked. "Excuse me. You might want to double-check your information," he said evenly. "I think you're mistaken about who owns this lake." Teresa actually laughed, a sharp, piercing sound. "Is that supposed to intimidate me? Do you know how long I've lived here?" Clarence didn't waver. "Do you know who purchased this lake 3 years ago? Who maintains it, pays taxes on it, signed off on your fishing club's access in the first place?" For a fleeting moment her expression shifted, a small flicker of uncertainty, but it vanished instantly. "You're bluffing," she asserted. Clarence walked back to his trailer and secured the line to the boat. "All right. You do what you have to do." "I will," she said. "You'll be hearing from the board." But Clarence wasn't bluffing, and Teresa had just initiated a conflict she was ill-prepared for. By 9 a.m., Clarence was already on the water, drifting among the reeds at the lake's eastern edge. He cast his line, unhurried, not even truly expecting a significant catch. The air was cool and serene, but his tranquility was short-lived. A white golf cart materialized near the dock. From a distance, Clarence immediately recognized her. Same posture, same brisk movements. Teresa Holcomb. This time, however, she wasn't alone. A man in a windbreaker with a radio clipped to his belt sat beside her, likely one of the HOA's contracted security personnel. They halted at the dock's edge. Teresa stood with feet wide apart as if presiding over a courtroom. "Clarence Rucker," she yelled across the water. "This is your final warning." Clarence slowly reeled in his line, swiveled his chair and waved. "Morning again, Teresa. I've contacted the sheriff's office. You're in violation of HOA regulations. You are to leave the premises immediately." The man beside her appeared hesitant, leaning in to whisper something. She shook her head, cutting him off. Clarence remained seated, calm, hands folded in his lap. That man with you, does he have a badge or just a walkie? Teresa stiffened. You don't need to concern yourself with that. Well, Clarence called out, if you're going to accuse someone of trespassing on private land, you might want to make sure you're not the one trespassing first. The security guard, young, probably mid-20s, finally stepped forward. Sir, may I ask your business on the lake? Clarence nodded. You may ask. I'm fishing. Are you a resident of Mayfield Hills? No. Then I'm going to have to ask you to come ashore. Clarence pulled his tackle box closer, not rising. Ever heard of Crescent Holdings? The young man paused. Can't say I have. Figures, Clarence said. They're a private trust. They bought this land in the lake 3 years ago. It's owned and managed by them. I'm the sole trustee. Teresa scoffed. What, you expect us to believe that? Clarence smiled. Don't really care what you believe. The paperwork's filed with the Greene County Recorder's Office. All public record. You can look it up right now. The security guy looked at Teresa, then back at Clarence. Do you have identification on you? In the truck. I'll need to see it. Clarence didn't move. I'll show it to a deputy when they get here. That's who you called, right? The guard shifted uncomfortably. Teresa, on the other hand, dug in deeper. This lake has been part of our community for decades, she snapped. Just because some shell company buys the land doesn't mean you can roll in here, act like you own it, and disrupt our peace. Ma'am, Clarence said with a steady tone, I didn't disrupt anything. You came to me. Her face flushed. You know what? Fine. Let's let the sheriff sort it out. But don't expect sympathy when they show up. Clarence leaned back in his chair, casting another line. Not looking for sympathy. Just some peace and quiet. But Teresa couldn't drop it. This wasn't just about a boat. It was about control, and she was beginning to lose her grip. By the time Clarence packed up his gear and drove home that afternoon, the sun was blazing, and the silence in his truck offered a welcome respite. The old leather seats groaned under his weight as he settled back, exhaling slowly, letting the quiet envelop him. He wasn't angry yet, but something stirred within him. Not bitterness, not resentment, just a quiet, rising reminder of what this lake signified and why he was there. His house, a modest, single-story pale green with fading white trim, sat about 10 minutes away, tucked just off a rural stretch of County Road 102, the kind of home built for living, not for display. His dog, Jasper, barked once from the porch as Clarence pulled in. Clarence waved and offered a faint smile, but he didn't linger outside. Inside, he kicked off his boots, tossed his keys onto the hook, and retrieved a framed photo from a shelf near the front door. It was old, edges faded, a soft crease running down the middle. His father stood barefoot by the lake, holding a fish with both hands, grinning as if he'd just won the lottery. Clarence was no older than 10 in that photo, smiling up at him with grass-stained jeans and crooked teeth. Dad, he muttered under his breath, you'd have handled her a lot better than I did. He poured himself a glass of iced tea and sat at the kitchen table. For a while he didn't stir. He just sat there, contemplating the look on Teresa's face, the absolute certainty in her voice, the way she'd written his name down as if he were some ill-intentioned trespasser. She hadn't cared who he was, she hadn't asked. She'd simply assumed. Clarence rose, walked to the filing cabinet in the hallway and slid open the bottom drawer. Inside was a blue folder marked Mayfield Lake Title and Access. He pulled it out, laid it flat on the dining table and flipped it open. There it was. The deed transfer from the previous landowners, signatures from Crescent Holdings, his name as trustee. The assigned agreement between the HOA and the holding company, granting conditional use of the lake to the community's fishing club, renewable annually but subject to review. No renewal had been filed in the last 10 months. He chuckled dryly. Guess they forgot who they were dealing with. The lake wasn't public. It never had been. The old owners had allowed the neighborhood access out of generosity. Clarence's father, before his death, had helped foster that understanding. He believed people should be able to share in nature as long as they respected it. But after Clarence inherited the trust, the same people who once shook his father's hand had become quiet, distant. A few waves here and there, no real effort to get to know him. Except Teresa, of course. Teresa had never even made eye contact. He reviewed the paperwork again, then again. There were no technicalities, no loopholes. The access was a courtesy, not a right, and he had every legal standing to revoke it if necessary. Still, Clarence didn't want to act on impulse. That wasn't his way. He wanted to offer the benefit of the doubt. But this wasn't just about one woman's rude behavior. It was about something larger. About entitlement, about respect. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in a while. "Hey, Mr. Lang," he said when the voice answered. "Yeah, I know it's been a minute. Listen, I need a favor. Can you pull up the HOA agreement file from 3 years ago? Specifically the phishing access clause." "Yeah, I've got the physical copy here, but I want to double-check a couple of things with you." He paused, listening. "No rush, but yeah, it's time I take a closer look at who's been taking advantage of what my father left behind." But as Clarence hung up the phone, he had no idea just how deep the entitlement in that neighborhood ran, or how loud it would get when someone finally said no. It was early Monday morning when Clarence stopped by the Greene County Recorder's office. He didn't need to, he already had the documents at home. But something told him this time things needed to be official, clean, foolproof. He stood at the counter waiting while the clerk retrieved the parcel records. A few clicks later, the screen displayed his name, the property description, and a scanned copy of the deed. Everything in black and white. The lake, the dock, the entire surrounding green belt. It was all his, held under the Crescent Holdings Trust. There were no overlapping claims, no shared easements, no community ownership. "Looks like everything's in order," the clerk said with a polite smile. Clarence nodded. "That's what I needed." When he got back in his truck, he took a deep breath. It wasn't about seeking revenge, not truly. It was about respect. Teresa Holcomb hadn't just questioned his right to be on the water. She'd looked him in the eye and decided he didn't belong. And no matter how calm he'd remained, her tone had made one thing unequivocally clear. This wasn't about rules. It was about power. Back at home, Clarence opened his laptop and a blank document. He began drafting a letter, direct, professional, and to the point. It was addressed to the Mayfield Hills Homeowners Association and its board members. He cited the terms of the original access agreement, emphasized that no renewal request had been submitted for the current year, and stated that, effective immediately, public access to the lake through HOA or club channels would be suspended until further notice. No angry language, no threats, just a clear revocation of access supported by documentation. He attached scanned copies of the original contract, the deed, and a notarized statement of his trustee status. By the time he was finished, the message was unassailable. He hit print, slid the letter and supporting documents into a thick envelope, and drove it down to the HOA office himself. It was a beige, single-story building tucked behind the subdivision's main gates. The parking lot was empty save for 2 cars. He walked in and handed the envelope to the receptionist without a word. "Do you want a receipt?" she asked, clearly surprised. Clarence looked her in the eye. "Just make sure Teresa gets it." That evening back home he sat on the porch with Jasper at his feet. The sun was setting across the treetops, casting golden light across the lawn. For the first time in days, Clarence felt a flicker of peace, until his phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Rucker," a man's voice said on the other end. "This is Ron Castile. I'm the acting president of the Mayfield Hills HOA board. We received your letter today." Clarence remained silent. Ron continued. "Look, we'd like to discuss this. Maybe there was a miscommunication somewhere. No need to escalate things." "There's nothing escalated about it," Clarence replied calmly. "The agreement wasn't renewed. Access was being used without permission. I've simply brought it back in line with the terms." "I understand," Ron said quickly, "but revoking access completely might not sit well with some of the residents. We've had use of that lake for years. And I haven't interfered," Clarence said, "but after the way your board member approached me on Saturday, I think it's best we take a pause." There was a pause. "Well, would you be open to meeting? Maybe find a compromise?" Clarence took a long sip of water before responding. "Let's see how folks handle a little humility first." He hung up without waiting for a reply. But the letter had only just landed, and Clarence had no idea the ripple it would cause behind those gates. By Wednesday morning, Clarence couldn't even pull into the grocery store parking lot without sensing stares. It began with emails, short passive-aggressive notes from board members, penned in the kind of polite language people use when they're trying not to betray their fury. Then came the phone calls. Some blocked, some from numbers Clarence hadn't dialed in years. But what surprised him most were the whispers emanating from people who had barely spoken to him since the day he bought the property. At the hardware store, a man with a gray beard and oil-stained overalls approached him near the screws and fasteners aisle. "You Clarence?" he asked, tilting his head. "I am," Clarence replied cautiously. The man extended a hand. "Name's Billy Waller. I live on Valley Crest Drive. Been here about 20 years. Heard what happened Saturday." Clarence shook his hand but remained mostly silent. Billy continued, "Just wanted to say not all of us feel the way Teresa does. She's had a habit of thinking she runs this whole place." Clarence gave a short nod. "She even told my wife last year that our front porch furniture didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. Imagine that." Billy laughed bitterly. "A chair is a chair. You either sit on it or you don't." Clarence cracked a smile. "I'll keep that in mind." That wasn't the sole encounter. At the post office, someone left an unsigned note in Clarence's P.O. box. "She doesn't speak for everyone." At the gas station, a middle-aged woman waved at him, then quickly looked away when he didn't wave back. People were attempting to gauge his reaction, testing the waters. But not everyone was playing nice. That afternoon, someone slid a flyer into his mailbox. No stamp, no envelope. It was printed on standard paper with a bold heading. "Local man revokes community lake access. Retaliation or power grab." Clarence stood on his porch, reading it, shaking his head slowly. Beneath the headline, a small paragraph suggested he was using his position as a weapon against the community, labeling his actions disruptive and unnecessary. There was no name listed, no one to call or question, but it didn't take a genius to guess the author. Later that evening, Clarence walked Jasper down the gravel path leading to the lake. He passed a couple standing near the waterline. They didn't speak, just watched him as he walked by, their fishing poles resting against the rocks. When he got back home, Clarence sat on his porch and watched the sunset again. He wasn't seeking a fight, he hadn't started one. But it was clear the neighborhood didn't take kindly to the reminder that access was a privilege, not a guarantee. The next morning he received another call, this time from a young woman named Andrea Preston. She lived on Lilac Bend Lane and said she was new to the HOA board, recently voted in after a string of resignations. "I just want to apologize," she said. "I wasn't there Saturday but I heard about it. Teresa doesn't speak for everyone and frankly, some of us are embarrassed." Clarence kept his voice calm. "That's good to know. There's talk of calling an emergency board meeting," Andrea continued. "Some want to reverse your decision. Others think we should formally reach out and negotiate a new agreement." "I'm not interested in negotiating," Clarence replied. "I'm interested in respect." Andrea hesitated. "Understood." But Clarence knew better than to think this would end with polite phone calls. Some folks weren't going to back down without a scene, and that scene was rapidly approaching. By Friday morning the HO office hummed, not with cheer but with a palpable tension. Clarence's letter had circulated widely. Copies exchanged hands at backyard barbecues, forwarded through email chains, and whispered about on neighborhood strolls. Every member of the fishing club had now read it, and no one held a neutral opinion. Inside the HOA's meeting room, a modest space with beige walls and mismatched chairs, Teresa Holcomb stood at the head of the table, arms folded, lips tightly pressed. She hadn't spoken yet, not officially, but everyone sensed her simmering fury. Ron Castile sat beside her, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We all read the letter," he finally said, his voice low and weary. "And whether we like it or not, Clarence is within his rights." One of the older members, Don Keeling, shifted in his seat. "So what? We just let him lock us out of the lake like we're trespassers?" Teresa's eyes narrowed. "He wants to make a point, that much is clear." "No," Andrea Preston said from the other end of the table. "He wants respect. And after what happened last weekend, I don't think he's out of line." Teresa turned toward her sharply. "Are you taking his side?" Andrea didn't flinch. "I'm not taking sides. I'm looking at the facts. The agreement expired. We didn't renew it. That's on us. But this affects the whole community." Teresa snapped. "That lake has been part of Mayfield Hills for decades. Families fish there, kids swim there in the summer. He can't just cut everyone off because he got his feelings hurt. Ron glanced toward her. This didn't start because of feelings. It started because you accused the man of trespassing on land he owns. For a moment the room fell silent. Meanwhile, Clarence was back at the lake, standing on the dock with a clipboard of his own. He wasn't patrolling or looking for trouble. He was taking inventory. Damage to the fencing, trash left behind, 2 broken benches near the fire pit. Things the HOA hadn't fixed in over a year, even though the access agreement clearly placed that responsibility on them. A truck slowed down behind him. The driver leaned out the window. It was Billy Waller again. "You sure you want to poke this hornet's nest?" he asked. Clarence didn't even look up. "I didn't poke anything. I stopped letting people stomp through my yard without asking." Billy chuckled. That afternoon, a notice went out, formally posted on the HOA bulletin board, sent via email, and slipped into residents' mailboxes in plastic sleeves to ward off the rain. The message was concise. Effective immediately, access to Mayfield Lake is suspended pending review and renegotiation with Crescent Holdings. Residents are asked not to use the dock, shoreline, or common greenbelt areas unless otherwise notified. Violations may result in trespass enforcement. The neighborhood's reaction was swift. A woman in her 60s stormed into the HOA office, demanding answers. Teenagers were seen arguing with their parents near the trail entrance. Online forums erupted with speculation, frustration, and half-baked legal theories. One post even claimed Clarence was secretly planning to sell the lake to a private developer, though no one could pinpoint the rumor's origin. Later that night, Clarence sat on his porch again. This time Andrea Preston came by. She knocked gently and kept a respectful distance. "I wanted to check in," she said, "and ask if you'd be willing to speak at the upcoming meeting." He raised an eyebrow. "To say what?" "Whatever you think they need to hear," she replied. "They don't know you. They just know Teresa's version." Clarence thought for a second, then nodded slowly. "All right. I'll come." But agreeing to show up was one thing. Facing a room full of angry neighbors was something else entirely. The community room at Mayfield Hills filled faster than anyone expected. Folding chairs were pulled from closets. Neighbors stood along the back wall and even outside the open doors. There hadn't been a turnout like this in years. Not for budget talks, not even for pool renovations. But that evening, everyone wanted to hear what Clarence Rucker had to say. He stood near the front, off to the side, wearing jeans and a plain button-up shirt. No podium, no papers in hand, just him, calm, observing. Teresa sat dead center in the front row, her arms tightly crossed, her jaw set like concrete. Behind her were faces Clarence recognized, some vaguely, some not at all. Most were quiet. A few avoided looking at him entirely. Ron Castile stepped up first. "Thanks for coming, everyone. I know this wasn't a scheduled meeting, but we felt it was important to address the concerns raised about lake access and recent events." He glanced toward Clarence, who gave a small nod. Ron cleared his throat. "Clarence Rucker has agreed to speak tonight. I'd ask that we all keep things respectful." Clarence stepped forward. He didn't speak immediately. He looked around the room slowly, meeting eyes when he could. "My father used to bring me to this lake when I was 10, he began, "before any of this neighborhood existed. We'd fish in the morning, cook on the shore in the afternoon. I learned how to tie my first line right here." A murmur rippled through the crowd. A few heads tilted. People listened. "I bought the lake 3 years ago through a trust that honors his legacy. I kept access open to the community. No fees, no conditions. Just expected folks to treat it with care." He paused. "But when someone walks up to you, demands you leave, threatens to call the cops on your own property, that's not just about rules. That's about disrespect." A woman in the back spoke up. "She didn't know who you were." Clarence looked at her. She didn't ask. There was a silence. No one attempted to argue. Clarence continued. "This isn't about punishing the community. It's about accountability. You've been using something that doesn't belong to you without maintaining it, without renewing the agreement, and at least from what I've seen, without even thinking about who's behind it." He stepped back, not trying to seize the spotlight. "I didn't want it to come to this. But I'm not going to apologize for asking to be treated like a person." That last sentence hit harder than he expected. A few people lowered their heads. One woman whispered to her husband. Then Teresa stood. "Why didn't you just come to us?" she asked, her voice tight. "Why go straight to shutting everyone out?" Clarence looked her straight in the eye. "You came to me first, remember? On the dock. With a clipboard and a threat." She opened her mouth to respond but didn't. She sat back down slowly. Ron stepped forward. "We're going to open discussion now. No shouting. Keep it constructive." Several hands shot up. An older man in a fishing hat said, "I don't care who owns what. That lake is part of this neighborhood's life. Kids have grown up on it." Clarence replied evenly, "Then maybe the neighborhood should care enough to respect the person who's kept it open all this time." Another woman asked, "Would you consider renewing the agreement if the HOA handled maintenance and put real guidelines in place?" Clarence didn't answer right away. He could feel the weight in the room. They weren't just angry anymore, they were listening. "I'll consider it," he said. "But I'm not rushing. Not until I know folks understand that this isn't just land, it's personal." But even as the meeting wound down, Clarence knew one thing. Respect couldn't be demanded, it had to be earned. And he'd just made them all think about how little they'd offered. The days that followed were unusually quiet. No more flyers in Clarence's mailbox, no anonymous calls, no teenagers fishing behind the reeds without permission. The same lake that had stirred so much noise just a week ago now reflected only trees and sky. Clarence didn't anticipate an apology from Teresa Holcomb, and he didn't receive one. But she retreated. No more accusations, no more standoffs. Word had it she'd resigned from the HOA board to focus on personal matters, though everyone understood the true reason. On Saturday morning, Clarence returned to the dock with a toolbox and a bucket of paint. Jasper trotted beside him, tail wagging. The benches were still broken, the fencing still loose, but he wasn't bitter about it. He wanted to fix it, not for the neighborhood but for himself, for his father. Midway through replacing a rotted wooden plank, he heard footsteps behind him. "Need a hand?" He turned. Andrea Preston stood there in jeans and sneakers, sleeves rolled up. She held a bag of screws and a cordless drill. Clarence nodded toward the bench. "You know how to work that thing?" "I do," she grinned. "You wouldn't believe how much HOA paperwork I fixed with this drill last year." He let out a low laugh and gestured to the broken bench. "Be my guest." They worked quietly for a while. Andrea didn't fill the silence with small talk, which Clarence appreciated. After about 20 minutes she finally spoke. "You know, there are a lot of people in the neighborhood who want to make things right." Clarence didn't look up. "Takes more than good intentions." "I know," she said. "That's why I've been talking to the new board. We're drafting a revised agreement, one that includes maintenance, cleanup schedules, and a rotating committee for oversight." He paused, then looked at her. "No more clipboards and threats?" "No more," she promised. "And any violations? They'll be handled internally. You won't be bothered." Clarence nodded slowly. "I'll read it when it's ready." Later that afternoon another surprise arrived. Billy Waller returned, this time with his teenage grandson Lucas. The kid held a trash bag in one hand and a pair of gloves in the other. "We figured we'd help out a little," Billy said. "Might not fix everything, but it's a start." Clarence didn't say much, just handed the boy a rake and pointed toward the trail where broken glass had collected by the brush. By sundown the dock looked new again. The benches were solid, the path was cleared, and for the first time since the whole mess started, Clarence felt something shift, not just in the space around him but in the people too. At church the next morning, a few heads turned when Clarence walked in. Some nodded politely. One woman leaned over and whispered, "That lake is lucky to have you." He thanked her even though he didn't know her name. After service, a man he didn't recognize approached him in the parking lot. Tall, balding, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. "You're Clarence, right?" the man asked. "I live 2 streets down. I just wanted to say my kid caught his first fish at that lake last summer. I never got the chance to thank you for keeping it open." Clarence didn't need the thanks, but it meant something, not just because it was sincere but because it came without being forced. That night as he walked Jasper along the trail, he thought back to his father again. The scent of fresh-cut grass, the sound of a reel spinning, the stillness of early morning water. His father used to say, "People don't always know the value of something until it's nearly gone." He understood that now more than ever. But Clarence also realized something deeper. Respect isn't handed out in letters or meetings. It's earned, plank by plank, person by person, choice by choice. A week later, Clarence stood alone at the edge of Mayfield Lake. The air was cool, the water still, and the sunrise painted long streaks of orange across the surface. He hadn't brought his fishing rod. This time he didn't need it. He just stood quietly listening, not to the birds or the breeze but to the absence of noise. No shouting, no conflict, just stillness. In a plastic folder under his arm was the revised access agreement. Andrea and the new board had worked hard on it. This time there were clear terms. Scheduled maintenance days, a 3-strike rule for littering, a mandatory renewal every 12 months, no automatic carryovers, no assumptions. Most importantly, every member of the HOA fishing club would now have to take a short orientation before being allowed to use the lake. Nothing fancy, just a reminder of the lake's history, of who owned it and what it stood for. Clarence didn't do it for control. He didn't even do it for the apology that never came. He did it because letting people walk all over something precious doesn't just damage the place. It changes how you see yourself. And Clarence wasn't about to let one woman's entitlement rewrite a legacy built over decades. Later that day he returned to the neighborhood clubhouse, where the new board awaited his signature. A few familiar faces were there, some friendly, some unsure, but none hostile. As Clarence signed the last page of the agreement, Andrea leaned in. "We're going to do better," she said. Clarence nodded. "I'll hold you to that." On the way out he passed a small group of teenagers gathered near the bulletin board. They went quiet when they saw him, unsure of what to say. Then one of them, a lanky boy with a fishing hat too big for his head, stepped forward. "Mr. Rucker?" Clarence paused. "My dad told me you fixed the dock. Said I should thank you." Clarence gave a small smile. "Just take care of it." "We will," the boy said quickly. "Promise." Walking back to his truck, Clarence felt something ease in his chest, the kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from being understood, even if only a little. He thought again about that Saturday morning, about Teresa storming up with her clipboard, about how quickly she made up her mind about him. He hadn't yelled, hadn't pushed back with fire. He let the truth and the law speak for themselves, and in the end that was enough. The lake had taught him that sometimes the best way to earn respect isn't to demand it. It's to walk with it quietly, firmly, and let others catch up. And maybe, just maybe, by standing still you make enough noise for change. If you've ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you, where you were dismissed before anyone asked your name, remember this. Silence doesn't mean weakness, and standing your ground with dignity speaks louder than any argument. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. There's more where this came from. Real stories, human stories, lessons worth remembering.